you think that being the chief is going to be this great thing. But it also comes with its challenges, and it comes with a lot of things which you may not actually want to do. And that is why a lot of people actually reject the full visibility. They remain invisible. They don't actually want the chief to incarnate. They want their genius to be seen without actually wanting themselves to be seen. Welcome to today's episode. Thank you for joining us. My name is Tio, and today I'm going to be talking about a topic which has me very excited over the last few weeks, because it's only in the last few weeks I've come to realize the importance of identity ownership and how it's a game changer when it comes to the way the world receives you and your genius. And then I'm going to be weaving into that spiritual mastery and how the two play together. And an additional topic on top of that for today's episode is going to be the difference between just being a leader, being a steward, which is becoming a new trend in spiritual or conscious leadership, and being a chief, who, which the way I see it, it's a bridge between these two worlds, where the old paradigm of leadership is overly masculine. It's very heavy on masculine traits. Let's just leave it there for now. And then you have the other side, which becomes a reaction from the spiritual and conscious community, which is about stewardship, where you have to surrender your ego and leave it behind and just be a servant of the organization that you're leading, which is something that has not sit well with me. And I have only come to realize recently the reason for that was because it goes too much into the feminine and it's too much of a reaction to the old way of leadership. And what I have realized through contemplation is that the bridge between these is about embodying the chief. And just a brief gist of what the chief is, it's someone who, where it's not about your ego, which is old paradigm leadership, and it's not just about the organization, but it's owning your role as the leader of the organization, and at the same time, putting the organization first. So it's not just about me, but I do own the importance of my role and my identity as the leader of the organization. I don't just become a steward of it. So we will dive deeper into these topics, and we are with Lise, who is my co-host.
Firstly, I just want to say I had a real issue with these terms when you first presented them. I hate the term chief. Like, I hated the term chief because it felt so archaic and patriarchal, and just all the usual associations that you have with those. And I have since leveled out a lot with that terminology. But just for anybody else out there who might have the same kind of, if you're a woman listening to these terms like chief, steward, it's primarily associated with very masculine vibes in general, but obviously we're meaning it in a very neutral, energetic sense to begin with. Yes. And can you just go into a bit more about the chief in terms of how that plays within your inner world?
Yeah, I want to talk about the association with the term chief. It's very important, the point that you brought up. Whatever associations you may have, they are only relevant to you. And owning the term, reclaiming the term from whatever cultural definition and association that you have developed with that term, so that we can, like you said, start on a neutral ground to really understand what the term is about, which we will get into clarifying that throughout the episode. Consciousness development, which today I'm also calling spiritual mastery, has different levels, where we start off at the most basic level, where we have no consciousness. We are just robots following the programs that have been given to us. And once we come to realize that, is the first level of consciousness, as we become aware of being robots. And then as we go through the progression, our aim is to become the chief of ourselves. And what does that mean? In just to explain that briefly, that we have many parts within ourselves, which are programs we have picked up, which are also distinct parts of our personality. And at our basic level of consciousness, we don't have a chief that's governing all of these parts. And it's just random chaos. Whichever part gets to be in the driver's seat, drives the car, and we just keep going back and forth. We don't have a dominant chief. We may have one part of our personality which is dominant, but that part doesn't take into consideration the other parts. And that's why we may have big conflicts within ourselves where life is going in one direction where the rest of us is not happy. And that leads to all kinds of things like midlife crisis and depressions and basically people not being truly fulfilled because they're only honoring one part of themselves, which usually turns out to be the part that's favored by the system, by the culture, the part which gets accepted by the culture. And we go by life ignoring the rest. So consciousness development is about first getting to know all our parts and then developing this chief that acknowledges all our parts and makes a conscious decision where the ship goes by listening to all the parts, because all parts have value. All parts need to be honored. That doesn't mean that all parts get what they want, but they at least listen to. And the general consensus is governed by this chief. So the chief is essentially very neutral because listening to all parts. It's not just a masculine chief or a feminine chief. It's a chief that really, it, being the chief essentially is about being deeply centered in the energetics of masculine, feminine, and the light and the dark and all of that. That's what spiritual mastery is all about. But before we can get to the chief, there's an important stage, which is the steward. And that term is important. The steward essentially prepares the throne for the chief. It does all the dirty work, which means putting order in the house, so that when the chief arrives, the chief's job is to run the house, to direct the ship, whatever metaphor you want to use there. But a lot of people think that the steward will become the chief. And usually the steward is I, the, the one I that has taken responsibility for personal growth, for self-development, for self-mastery, whatever term you want to use, is the part that is wanting for life to get better. And it starts taking charge and it starts putting order within the personality. It starts doing things which are healthy. And essentially, that's why it's called a steward. It's, all it is doing is putting order. But that part doesn't have the qualities and the power to become the chief. The chief is something that is, we can call it our inner master. It comes when the house is in order. And the energy of the chief is entirely different from the energy of the steward because the chief is inherently balanced. The steward may have to do lifetimes of balancing work and authority work and confidence work and communication skills and all of this to get to where the chief can be in an instant because it is already that. So in the way that I guide people, the first level is self-mastery, where all you're doing is putting order to the house, making sure the parts are not, in conflict. They're not just doing what they want. It's not just impulsive behavior. It's not addictive behavior. It's not avoidant, whatever it is. All of these parts have basically been brought to order. And there are many ways of doing that. It's not the strict disciplinarian, authoritarian way. It's done with love and compassion, even by the steward. It's done with both energies. There is love and compassion, but there is also the place for We can call it self-discipline. I am not a big fan of that term, but essentially that's what it is. It's you're putting intention into who you want to be. When that self-mastery has been achieved, that is when the chief can appear. And that is when the spiritual mastery begins. Because spiritual mastery is acting from the chief and directing that ship. And then whether you become the leader of an organization or you're the leader of your inner world, it's all about leadership. That's what the chief does. That's the chief's role. The steward cannot be the leader because the steward is just a steward.
It's still sometimes a hard pill to swallow when I really feel into it, but at the same time, I feel the sense in everything you're describing. And it's just about, so I feel like it's just an ego thing of it's uncomfortable to imagine like I don't get to continue. Like it's going to be a completely different being in my body that continues. And I'm going to presumably take on more of a, like, I don't know, the current me is just going to be like something in the background.
An assistant, essentially.
Yes. And so for my ego, it's just so difficult to contemplate. But if I zoom out quite a bit, I'm so happy and eager to get this ball rolling and to have this happen. And at some point, I'm going to have to sort of, I don't know, like sacrifice myself. Like I don't know what that process is going to look like or feel like, but
So
it's
this topic came up because you're already in the process of this. You've done the self-mastery work over the last few years. We've done it together. And now you're in the process of the transition where the chief can incorporate or take the seat. And it is scary. And for the ego, Ramdas has this really great description in his book where he says that the one who starts the journey is not the one who will finish it. And essentially, that's what is happening. And ego death needs to take place because also the ego that we have in our lower consciousness, essentially, which we are calling the steward, wants to be the leader for all the wrong reasons. And that is why that sublimation needs to take place because the chief knows the priorities, knows it's not about me, but it still owns that authority to be the leader. So it's not being a leader to just be a leader. It's being a leader because that's just what its role is. It's a master in leadership inherently. It knows how to bring harmony to an organization. It doesn't need to learn that skill as a leader. It knows how to honor the full organization. It knows how to, and all of that is happening because the development work has been done to listen to your inner part. You're bringing that inner leadership to the outside. So that self-mastery is important because it teaches you to develop compassion. It teaches you to develop discipline. It teaches you to prioritize all of that within yourself. And then that just gets externalized as you show up as a leader of an organization or a leader in any role. You could be leading the world on a different stage as a celebrity, as a speaker, a performer, whatever it is. So what I started realizing is that identity ownership is what completely changes the game, where you start realizing that essentially the chief is is in that position to play a much bigger role in a much bigger game. It's not about the ego. And because you're honoring that role, you also own the identity. It's kind of like a simultaneous thing. It's not I'm owning the identity because I am so uh great and look at me. It's not out of that vanity or arrogance. It's the ownership is that yes, I know how important my role is. And I I own the identity to protect that role, to to honor it fully, essentially. And that's why the reason for being a leader, the reason for owning the identity, all of that is completely different from what the ego usually wants, where the ego is acting out of a wound, an insecurity, a need that's unfulfilled, a need to be seen, a need to be recognized, a need to be validated. There's nothing wrong with all of those needs. They're important needs, they need to be fulfilled. But they only really get fulfilled when we allow the soul to shine through. And that is essentially what it means to allow the chief, which is your soul, which is your spirit, your higher self, whatever you want to call it, to take the seat and drive instead of the ego. That soul, the way it shines, the way it acts, the way it does everything, is impossible. It will not get everything that you so desperately crave and need from the ego. If you see it with clarity, these are soul level needs, which get translated to the ego, but they cannot be met in the ego. They get met at the soul level when the ego does the work for the soul to shine, when the ego prepares the stage for the soul to shine. And if we can see our role, that that's also an important role. If we are at the level of self-mastery or stewardship, it's an important role to play too. Because without you creating the stage, the chief doesn't get to shine. So in a movie, the production cast is as important as the actors and the director and all of that. The cast knows that, the actors know that very well, that without that whole cast, they are nothing in a sense. Without the director playing their role, without the camera person playing their role, the actor will be nothing. So it's to know your role. The chief knows his role. The struggle happens when the steward doesn't acknowledge and accept their role. And for us to realize that we don't have to get stuck at the level of steward, that there is a chief level. And we have to also allow that to incarnate through us, to play through us.
It's a very bizarre situation to find yourself in because knowing all of this, like I'm so there is like a hunger, a real yearning for it all to take place and unfold. Like I want the process of the chief to emerge and to take its seat so much. Like it's although that if on the one hand my ego part's like, well, I'm gonna have to sacrifice myself and that's scary. On the other hand, it's like, but you're just like a busy bee, just doing everything to, like you said, it's like preparing, getting the house in order, preparing everything, because this is everything that you desire. Like every cell in your body is telling you, like, head towards this direction, do this now, do this. Like you can't help, once you find yourself on the path, it sort of is an unfolding, and you get closer and closer to it, and you're like, doesn't matter that I'm not going to be the one that experiences it, because the closer you get, it's like it just has its own gravity and starts to pull you in, and you're like, I just want this. Like my ego really does want it as well. It's just
Yeah,
afraid.
I think there is a stage where that transition takes place, where you started the game not knowing that you're going to die. You started the game not knowing that you don't get to win. Essentially, you started the game thinking that you are the lead actor, and later on you realize you're just supporting cast. That transition is very difficult if we resist it, if we don't accept that this is really what my role is. Yes, it becomes very difficult. But at the same time, if we do accept it, it can be very easy, because it's just like, oh wow, I get to play this role to make this happen. right? It's just an attitude. It's what you say to yourself. It's like, wow, I get to play this very key role for something very big to unfold, for some master, for some genius, for some celebrity to take seat through me and to have that. And that chief is going to acknowledge and reciprocate in many ways all your efforts. So you do, when an actor wins an Oscar, essentially the whole cast gets to feel the impact of that because they know that they have contributed to making that happen. If you have the right mindset, you can also be in the cast thinking, oh, why do they get all the glory? It really depends where you put your attention, where you can receive the validation or not. And a lot of people stay stuck in that identity where they block the validation, even though it's actually coming to them. So that transition from the ego being the leader to the steward can be very easy if you realize that I am going to benefit from this role. And if this is my role, I accept it with grace and I enjoy the role that I'm playing because also that is an enjoyable role. Every role has an attitude where you can enjoy it. And there are also this, you think that being the chief is going to be this great thing, but it also comes with its challenges and it comes with a lot of things which you may not actually want to do. And that is why a lot of people actually reject the full visibility. They remain invisible. They don't actually want the chief to incarnate. They want their genius to be seen without actually wanting themselves to be seen. Whereas for the chief, they want the whole package. So is to realize that when you get to that level, it's going to be effortless to deal with the full game. But what is impossible for you today is effortless for the chief. You get to do your role, your parts, and enjoy that part. And the other heavy lifting, the other challenges will be also dealt effortlessly by the chief. So it's a team. It's not the chief is more important. It's a team effort, and everyone gets the rewards of it.
Yeah, it's sort of saying I'm gonna get like more resources, like this aspect of me that knows how to handle so many things, like you said, that feel impossible to me now. It is amazing to consider. Like if someone was just like, hey, would you like this gift? Like all of you would be like, yes, I absolutely do. But the moment that I think you first explained to me, it's going to require that you don't get to go, you don't get to be it. It's just so very hard to imagine that because this is all I've been my entire life. This is all I know. So given that you're on the other side of that, can you describe what it's like to get to know your chief and what that's
I
like?
will I will rewind a bit because it's important for me to explain that I was in that dilemma myself. My ego, while feeling the lack of attention and the lack of validation and the lack of recognition, because I knew that I have so many skills, so many gifts that can help people, that can transform lives, that can have a big impact in the world. And yet I'm not being seen. So a part of me is resentful for not being seen. A part of me is feeling I want to be seen. And yet I know that the majority of me doesn't want visibility. It doesn't want recognition. It doesn't want fame, whatever the definition is for me or for anyone else. I just don't want to deal with the energetics of a lot of people getting to know me and having a public figure at whatever degree it is, right? It doesn't you can have a public figure where you're known within a company by thousands of employees or hundreds of employees or even dozens of employees, or you can be at a scale where millions of people are watching your life or billions of people are watching your life. So there are all kinds of degrees of a public figure. my ego was rejecting it all. I just did not want to have a public figure. I did not want visibility. And at the same time, I wanted recognition. So I was stuck in this paradox. I reached that stage where not being seen, not being recognized, started feeling suffocating. It started feeling like the resentment just became unbearable. And that is where the switch happened for me. People don't have to go to that extreme. You can make the switch earlier. That's where I reached. I just really was tired of not getting the recognition that I knew I deserved. And so I made that internal decision. It's time to shine. It's time to allow my light to be seen. And that was a 2 year process, which started exactly 2 years ago in February 2022. And it's been a journey because I had to shed many layers of beliefs to even get to the place where the master or the chief can take the seat. Because there was so much resistance to having a public figure or shining or being recognized. So I was doing everything possible, including we were just discussing today, looking back at my old videos, it's repulsive, at least to me, the way I used to communicate, because I would just make myself unlistenable. And yet some people wanted to listen. But if I look at that today, I don't want to listen or see that person. And that was my intention. Even though I want to distribute my knowledge, I am distributing it in a way that people will not want to see it. And that was one of the insights, very powerful insights I had recently, is that if you are not visible, it's because you don't want to be visible. It's not because the world is passing you by. It's not because people don't want to see you. It's because you don't want to be seen. Take that ownership. Realize that, recognize that, and that will already kill the frustration of not being seen. It will kill the resentment. You don't get to blame anyone or the world, and you don't even need to blame yourself. It's just accepting that actually, really, I'm not ready to be visible. I don't want to be visible. I prefer to stay at this level. And when you say that, another part of you is going to wake up and say, no, 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 that's not true. You, this part, may not want to be visible, but I do. And so that is where the reconciliation starts taking place. And you come to a decision point in your life where you have to decide, which identity and am I going to choose? For me, I reached that point where most of me did want to be visible, and my resentful part, or the part which wanted to remain invisible, kind of lost the battle. It had its time, it had its years of remaining invisible, and then the rest of me said, okay, it's time. You had your glory days, which were basically not glory days, and it's time for real glory days. It's time to shine. And the real shift happened not just by wanting to be seen, but realizing that the reason I want to be seen, which came from the chief. So you asked, how do you recognize the chief's qualities? It became so clear to me that my ego part said wanted to be seen just to be seen. I had this deep seated program. So let's take a small detour and talk about that. When it comes to identity, ownership, and personality, our given personalities, our culture-driven personalities, our egos, essentially, which have been built from our childhood, have a few of these holding pins. I don't know if linchpin was there's some term which is like something at the core which is being held together by a pin. Anyway, I think people get the idea, it's like it's not a very solid structure. It's got some cracks and they have been fixed by a hack. Like, there's this pin that's holding everything together. And our egos are this way. We have these pins, which are essentially core beliefs that are holding the whole ego together. And around that core structure, there are many layers of beliefs and habits and behaviors that are driven by these core beliefs. And most people do the work on these outer layers, on the habits, on the behaviors, or on the more superficial beliefs. But it is those holding pins. Once you pull it out, the whole structure unravels. And I had two big ones that I have worked on a lot in my life. One was around my appearance. I had created this narrative that I am unappealing, people don't want to see me, which was very convenient for the ego that wants to remain invisible, right? So, perfect. I did a lot of work on the appearance part to realize with feedback from people that, yeah, I am attractive, not to the whole world, but to some people, I am attractive. At least I'm tolerable. At least I'm not someone you don't want to look at, which was kind of the narrative where it was like, I'm unattractive. So I did a lot of work in shifting that. The second one, I did a lot of work, but I only realized that it was a holding pin recently, and that was around being stupid. And it was literally just the final thing of the shift because I had already done all the work around it. But my my need and desire to be seen from the ego was to prove that I am not stupid. Look at how smart I am. So it was all about proving, look at me, I'm a genius. So my reason for wanting to be seen was driven by that insecurity that I'm stupid. And I just want validation from people about, wow, you're so great, you know so much stuff, you're such a genius, blah, blah, blah. And so that was the whole ego drive. The shift from that comes when I realized that I want to be seen, I want visibility, but the chief wants visibility because that's how you drive impact. So earlier I had this big rejection to, presentation and uh, communication skills and all of that. And the whole thing was my genius will speak for me. And people, if they get it, they get it. If they don't, they're stupid. The problem is with them. Screw them. And it was this very heavy energy. And the shift that has taken place is that I am excited to develop my communication skills. That's in fact the very thing I'm focusing on right now. Because I understood that if I want to have impact, if I want to have influence in the world, if I really want to help people, I need to be someone who can be received easily. If people have to go through this whole effort to receive me because I don't have good communication skills, I am not a good presenter. If I'm not presentable, if I cannot be received by people, it's too much effort for them to make to get my genius, to get whatever I have to give to them. And so they would just much rather go to someone else. And I know that I have unique things to give. And basically, the people are just missing out because of my arrogance, because of my stubbornness that is basically rooted in insecurities and silly beliefs. So, shifting that, coming into the chief, was realizing that I am doing this because my intention, my priority is helping people, is having an impact, is playing my role in the world fully. And the moment I had that realization, it just became excitement to develop all the qualities that will allow the chief to flourish, which essentially the chief already has. It's me bridging that gap between my ego and here's the difference. When I'm working on my communication skills now, it's not to learn how to communicate. My chief already knows that. As I said, in the identity of the chief, the personality of the chief, those skills are inherent. Me doing this communication course at this stage is about unlocking the chief fully. It's not about learning communication skills. It's me practicing, doing some practices that allow that chief to unfold fully. So it's a huge difference. And it's coming back to one of the client testimonials, which was published recently, where this client essentially unlocked her innate presentation and speaking abilities just by shifting her identity, not by learning communication skills or anything. I'm using this course not to learn communication skills. I really want to emphasize that I'm using the course just to unlock whatever remaining resistances are there in my ego, whatever heaviness is there that is really just blocking the chi from coming through. I know that going through these practices and these exercises, I will be forced to do things which are uncomfortable for my ego, and my ego resists simply because it keeps me in that old identity of staying invisible. And because I have already committed and the chief is already here and saying, dump that shit, it's time to be visible. Like these just become keys to unlock that. And so the speed at which I develop those skills also will be much more rapid as compared to if it is my ego with all of this heaviness and resistance to being visible, trying to practice that. The reason a lot of people buy communication courses, they get coaching and all of that, and it doesn't really work. Many of them don't even finish the course, is because it's the ego trying to learn communication without actually wanting to be visible. So the issue is at the identity level. If you cannot resolve that, you're not going to shine fully. Your genius will not radiate through fully because you will keep blocking without even realizing it, or maybe even realizing it at a very deep conscious or unconscious level. But like you kind of know you don't want to be seen, but you keep telling yourself this story that, oh, I need to be visible. I should be visible so that I can make money. You're doing it for all the wrong reasons. The right reasons already are present in the chief.
I like that you're making essentially one of the points you're making is that it's actually egoic of you not to become your full potential. To not actualize on your potential is egoic. Like you're sat there thinking like, oh no, I don't want to put myself out there, that would be scary, or like being really visible and enjoying attention would be an inflation of my ego, and the reality is it's the other way around. And it's so interesting how we can convince ourselves of that.
Yeah, it's so interesting because there's another lady who, the number of times she has brought up that topic that I know I'm meant to shine, but is this just my ego talking? It's such a common thing that people have this confusion thinking that shining is all about the ego, being having a personality is all about the ego, but actually rejecting your chief and rejecting the chief's identity is more egoic than shining as your chief, because your chief is shining to play its role in the world, to do what it's meant to do. It's not shining for all the attention. So we really need to break that association. It's so important to understand the reason you're shining is totally different.
Yeah, I feel if you focus on, how you were talking about effectively the chief is like living out your soul's code. Like is that what you want, rather than focusing on the fear of the visibility and what that could bring about, because it won't be you that is being visible. It's just, do you as the ego steward, do you want to live out your soul's purpose and actualize yourself? And then you don't need to worry about all the other stuff so much. Well, you kind of do, but also you don't need to focus on it. At least that's not your main drive.
The thing is, if you have really done the work of self-mastery and done the work of surrendering to the chief, you don't need to worry about all of that nonsense about being egotistical and arrogant and all. None of that applies anymore. You don't need to put any energy into that because, like I said, the chief already has the right attitude. It already knows why it's doing everything. It's not all about me. I the only thing I'm doing is honoring my role. That's how the shift takes place. So again, just to emphasize, what's impossible for one is effortless for another. So let the right part deal with it. Your ego doesn't have to deal with all the shit. Invoke the right part to deal with it. That's exactly what a chief does. The chief also doesn't have to do everything. The chief is the chief because it knows what part to call forward to deal with a particular situation.
That's brilliant, because I was about to ask about, how are you finding the internal dynamics of listening to your ego, steward, human part? Does it put up much of a fight still, or is it starting to get really let go?
I am in the last stages, so the fights are still a bit intense, but it's already clear that it's a losing battle. So it's like, you fight with spirit, knowing that or having the hope that you can win. That's the spirit and that hope is gone. Now it's just like fighting to fight with the last breaths that are remaining. That's how it is right now. And the more I center into the chi, again, managing the inner dynamics is something that is effortless for the chief. It's intuitive leadership. So it is automatic. It already knows. And I've been in that state many times, enough times to know that is very effortless. But if it is the ego, the steward that has to lead the team, it's a lot of effort because each part is, struggling and fighting and wants its way. And the ego doesn't have the personality and the authority to just make it effortless and harmonious. It has to put in a lot of effort and struggle to make sure that everyone is just staying calm. Whereas in the presence of the chief, that is a given. The calmness is automatic. It's not the struggle and this effort, it's just automatic. The governance is automatic. People don't keep challenging your authority and keep struggling and resisting and fighting and rebelling because as the chief, you are truly playing your role and you're truly honoring the full team. You're giving the attention that each part deserves. You're listening, you're compassionate, your heart is open as the chief. Whereas with the ego, that's not the case. It has to make an effort to open the heart and be compassionate. For the chief, it's normal.
Do you believe that, like, the bigger the impact that you want to have, the more visible you need to be, your soul's code, etc.? Do you think that, yeah, if you the bigger the impact you want to have, the stronger the fight you're going to receive from your ego to reject the chief? Or do you think everyone is at like an even playing field, that it doesn't matter even if you're not looking to achieve huge visibility and huge impact, like you said, but you're still going to have an ego that basically will give you the same level of fight of like, I don't want to become that initially?
I did believe that narrative earlier, and I think it's a false narrative because there is this old paradigm spirituality narrative which says that the people who have the most trauma are the ones who are meant to shine the most, and this kind of thing. And today, I believe it's everything is about your inner attitude. The people with the most trauma can very easily get into self and spiritual mastery with the right attitude. And I've seen it because I've coached many people in that way. And then I've seen people who've lived relatively much easier lives who are extremely stuck in the way they go about things because of their attitude. Is really that is the key defining factor is attitude. The moment you decide that whenever challenges come up, I'm just going to move with it. I want to flow with it. So if, let's say, the challenge we spoke about, if it comes to my awareness that I'm not going to be the leader, my role is assistant, I accept it. I feel the feelings, but I accept it and I move on. But the person who is in the other attitude is going to resist and fight with the idea. They're going to fight with a fact, a reality. They're going to basically keep fighting with reality and wasting their energy, wasting time, and just it can go on forever. And what will happen 10 years later after fighting and struggling? You'll realize I have to still accept it. So that moment of acceptance can take a second, a year, a lifetime, a million lifetimes. It's just that. It's you shifting and saying, okay, this is the reality. And I move with it.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. And where do you see for you is the when you refer to the master, is that synonymous with the chief for you?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
And that's also the reframe on spiritual mastery is that you enter into mastery doesn't mean that you know it all and have reached the, the peak. You've entered the journey of mastery. That's a big distinction. So the first stage is identity ownership, right? Where you go into the identity of the chief. You switch from ego driven to driven by inspiration, driven by the chief. And that shift can be very quick. It doesn't matter where you are on your journey. The moment you make that shift, you've already started your spiritual mastery journey already. And that journey goes on for a lifetime or eternally, essentially. It goes on eternally. So that game is about mastering my craft, about allowing myself to shine more, to grow my impact, to it's basically the growth game instead of the game of suffering and struggle. So that's how I differentiate it. Is that the master is not a know-it-all. And that's why also there's a difference between the old leader who's that or the old guru who is a know-it-all. That is the old guru master. And the new master doesn't know it all, but is working on mastery. And it knows many things and will keep knowing more. And as it knows more and as it grows more, its impact grows. Your impact keeps growing. So it's not only when I have reached the peak, then I will show myself to the world. Only when I have become a master as it is defined in my head, then I will come out to the world. No, you already come out and you share whatever you already have to share and you keep sharing more and more.
I think for me, one of the biggest incentives has been the realization that it's like you're describing it, there are so many more interesting games to play than the healing game. And I'm not even aware of all the games there are to play, but I got sucked into the healing game because I was like, this is great. This is fascinating and, you know, amazing in many ways. And it feels great to heal. And you kind of get hooked on that. But
And it looks like you're making progress, but you're actually going nowhere.
yeah, that's it. Yes. That's the most difficult aspect of that game. Exactly. But knowing that, like you said, now you have, if you're focused on the game of growth and expansion, it's it's just, it just feels so much lighter and it's so much more exciting. And you have so many more resources and challenges, but different challenges. Just more, just it's a different game. Finally, you're like, I'm ready for a new game, like something different. And that in itself is so exciting to me, to imagine that, like, wow, it can get so much more intricate, so much more challenging, but equally I will have more resources to deal with those challenges, and at the same time to impact other people, to start actually helping other people with where I have got to. You're simultaneously presumably sharing your journey and having that ripple out, which is like nothing else quite
Yeah,
like.
that is so important that you don't keep waiting for some magical notice from the universe that you are done healing and now you can go out to the world. And just to clarify, even in this game, healing keeps happening. You need to heal. It's not like suddenly all your problems are solved. Mastery includes, or spiritual mastery includes healing, but that's a tiny part of the game. And this, like you said, there is so much more to it. The ego can shift into wanting the visibility game, even for the right reasons. Again, when it comes to the attitude that we have. So when it comes to self-mastery, the key thing we really need to master is our attitude in how we shift. And then essentially, the moment we have the right attitude, we will start realizing that we are constantly being given signs of what needs to shift. And with the right attitude, we can take them and jump on them and really accelerate forward. Where if we have the wrong attitude, it's a denial of the signs that are super obvious, things that people are telling us. It's right in our face what we need to do, but there's denial, there's resistance. With the right attitude, it accelerates because we are hungry to know why we are stuck. We're hungry to know how we can get the chief here. And a lot of that has to do with the communication with the chief, just setting the intention, which I spoke about in the last episode. The most important is communicating your intention very clearly and strongly, saying, I want this. I want my chief to incorporate through me. I'm ready to surrender and at the same time realize that my life as an ego is also going to get much better. My struggles are going to reduce. The amount of effort I have to put is going to reduce. I'm going to receive more support, more help, more abundance in terms of wealth, resources. Everything is just going to get better. So when that shift takes place, I think that, in my experience, has been the key that the ego starts wanting. That's when you said, that gravitational pull happens, but also you're not resisting the gravitational pull anymore. You're going with it, you're flowing with it, knowing that yes, this I feel like this is going to take me even closer till the day that transition happens. And when I have seen this in my experience a lot, both sides of it. When there is resistance, the transition feels like shit. It's full of suffering. And I only realized that it was my attitude when I had transitions that were extremely smooth and enjoyable. I started realizing that the whole spiritual mastery game can be enjoyed so much with the right attitude. And it can just be full of suffering with the wrong attitude. So it comes down to you deciding how is this experience going to be. We had this conversation offline where we were talking about this old paradigm spiritual culture narrative of the dark night of the soul. And I realize now it doesn't have to be a dark night of the soul. You can actually enjoy the spiritual transition. You can enjoy whatever you are letting go of and releasing and just say, this is great. This is me releasing whatever doesn't belong, and it's me creating space for the chief to incarnate. Great. Give it to me. I love it. The moment you have that attitude and really is to understand that that is an attitude, it stops being a dark night of the soul. It stops being all about suffering and heaviness. It really becomes fun. The whole process becomes so much fun.
Yeah, that is, yeah, all I can do is agree wholeheartedly with how exhilarating it feels to feel like you are going to be a bigger version of yourself and play game at a bigger level, play the game at a bigger level now, and like expansion and live more fully. Like I feel like I'm just gonna live more now, like be more sensitive to life, which who wouldn't want to feel more alive ultimately, and like be more, instead of just channeling my soul, like be my soul, just become my soul, just incarnate fully as that. It's magical. So yeah, I think this
So
is why.
talking about your own process, one of the things that we uncovered this week in our coaching was I asked the question, what are the resistances in you? What are the reasons you're blocking? Are there fears of what is coming? That's one of the reasons we don't want the chief is, the fears that are around what the chief is bringing into our life. Bigger challenges, bigger issues to deal with. That's how the ego perceives it. And that's why it doesn't want visibility. That's why it doesn't want growth. It's because it's familiar with the challenges at this problem. I can survive here. I can get by here. But when bigger challenges come, I might get overwhelmed. So let's just keep them away. And I put all my energy into resisting it. So asking that question was crucial. And at the time I asked the question, your response was, nah, there's nothing I really want though. But we all have that resistance. The key shift was I said something that if it's not here today, it's because you're not fully allowing. It's because you are not fully allowing. Again, it's about taking that ownership. And then the next day we had a private conversation where it got unveiled that you had this misconception about why you did not want it. The way when you had perceived your chief, you saw it, you projected that its behavior was impulsive. And so that's a bad thing. And so it's not my chief, obviously, and I don't want this part because it will bring uh risky behaviors to my life. And then we had that whole reframe where it was that no, it's not impulsive, it's inspired action. It's very intuitive, it's very connected, and it knows that this is exactly what needs to be done. It doesn't waste a second in acting on it because it's so connected, it's so in tune. So, and the moment that happened, you switch and boom, I want this now. Because that's what you had been asking for most deeply. You shared that I want inspired action in my life. So your ego says, I want inspired action, but when it's presented with inspired action, it demonizes it and says, that's impulsive. So how the perspective shifts, the same thing can be seen in such different ways. And yes, there can be impulsive behavior, but to understand the difference between the two things, until we actually clearly make that distinction, we will not realize how we are rejecting what we want. So the question to the viewer is, you're asking for something. So in a sense, what is the negative version of it? As we were explaining in your case, you're asking for inspired action. In your head, the negative projection of that is impulsive behavior. And the moment you see these as a contrast, now you need to clearly distinguish the two and say what really is inspired action and what really is impulsive behavior. And I'm not going to reject what looks like impulsive behavior, but is actually inspired action. So for the viewer is to ask yourself, what are you asking for? What is the contrast to that? And differentiate that and learn how to bring one and keep the other out.
I love that. And also, yeah, just to highlight again the point you made about right at the beginning also, which is that the thing you desperately want so much and you think you're doing everything in your power to get that, if you don't have it now, it's because there is something in you that doesn't want it. And to acknowledge that, I think that is such a key takeaway for me, is when you put the emphasis on, when I was like, no, there's nothing I'm rejecting, I want all of this, and you're like, then why don't you have it now? Right now, do it. And even though I couldn't in that moment initially figure out what is it that I'm rejecting, at least it highlights, no, there is something here that I'm in denial about. So yeah, like
And
with your
the moment that happens, right? Like then you ask the question, and the moment you put the question out there, the answer is going to come to you. If you really have the intention, the answer will come to you. So is intention again. I realize I don't have this today. I take ownership and I say, I'm the one blocking it. And let me ask, how can I really have this? What can I release to bring this into my life now?
I love that. I feel good. Do you feel good?
Yeah, it feels like a good place to close. It's a good exercise to leave people with, and we pick it up next time. Thank you very much
Thank you.
for co-hosting, and thank you for the viewer for listening. And if you have any questions, please drop them in the comments. And you'll see us next time.